Welcome back, everyone. This is the Game Dev Show. I'm Luke Greenaway, and this week we have Celia Hodent. Celia is basically a psychologist. She's got a PhD in psychology, and she takes us through a journey of obviously her extensive experience working with some of the biggest publishers, including Epic, Ubisoft. And yeah, it's great. We explore the psychology of the player base. We explore Celia's journey. I ask some really stupid questions about how much of our brain capacity we use. It's a lot more than I thought, unfortunately. All in all, fantastic episode. Let's dive in.
Okay, well, so let's start chronologically at the beginning. If you can tell us what you were like growing up, where you grew up, and when you started to be interested in games.
So I have a PhD in psychology. My specialization is in cognitive development. So it's cognitive science is the study of mental processes such as perception, attention, memory. And I've been working in the video games industry. In the past 10 years, I worked at Ubisoft in France. I'm French. Then Ubisoft in Montreal. Then I worked at LucasArts in San Francisco, working on Star Wars games that sadly never saw the light of day, like 1313. Oh. And I know. It's still hurting. Like, And I worked at Epic Games. I was director of user experience at Epic from 2013 to 2017. When I left Epic in 2017, I worked on a lot of different products at Epic, including Fortnite. And ever since then, I've been doing some consulting work. So I work with a lot of studios of different sizes to help them with their UX strategy overall. So now you want me to talk to me about my childhood?
Yeah. Well, we're not going to get Freudian with you, isn't that?
Should I lay down?
Yeah. But I would love to hear like where you grew up and what you were like as a kid.
Sure. I grew up in Paris, and as a kid, I was pretty quiet. I was reading a lot and playing a lot. My parents were very avid players of many different types of games. So that was always a thing. Like playing at home was something really important. Like, for example, yes, we would eat something nice because we're French, so we care about food, but we cared more about, eating fast and then play a game, play card games or play dice or play board games. And very early on, video games were introduced. So I started, and I can't even remember when I started to play video games, but I know my parents bought the Magnavox, the Philips, in French it's called Videopack. As far as I can remember, we play video games, like the very simple ones, like Pong-like games. Some of them were quite complicated, if I remember well. They were not good usability, not good UX back then. But playing was always the thing in my family. And I don't have any brothers and sisters, but I was playing with my parents a lot. That was the thing that we were doing together. And still today, when we see each other, what we want to do is have good food, but, go fast to the moment when we're going to play. This is really our thing.
That's really cute to me. I love I really love that your parents like had that interest and that y'all shared that and still do.
Yeah. My dad, I introduced my dad to World of Warcraft.
Really?
It was probably like in 2005 or something like that. And he still plays today.
Oh, wow. That's so good. That's so good. It's great. I love a parent-child video game. Yeah. I play games with my son. We've kind of got that point where I used to teach him and be like, the asset to the team.
Yeah.
He now carries me and I'm like relegated to like some form of healer.
How old is he?
He's 15.
Okay. Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just, independent. I'm shit at games now. So I think I just embarrass him.
Yeah. He coaches you now.
Yeah. He coaches me. Completely. So I know we're going to obviously talk a lot about your role, what you do and your background. But I really want you to tell us a bit about the Bliss.
Yeah.
Because I saw. Well, I'll let you explain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I talk about it when I'm prompted, but the Bliss was my rock band when, in my previous life. That was really what I wanted to do, be a rock star. Well, at least, be in a band and tour. So
I love that you've described yourself as an introvert, but you wanted to be a rock star.
I didn't say that. I say that I was quiet when I was a kid.
You did say you were quiet. Oh, a quiet rock
See,
star.
we have a tendency to make, so we can talk about unconscious bias later. We have a tendency to go straight to conclusions just with very little information. But even so, you're right, actually, I'm not super outgoing. But in the situation where I am on stage, it's different. So whether it is on stage because I'm doing a conference, or right now we're on stage because we're doing a podcast. So, I take on that role. When playing music, it's the same thing. It's like theater, you're on stage. And so it's not you, it's someone else being on stage. So I do love that. Yeah, I love music, rock music. I wish it had worked, but it was back in the day when rock music was not really trendy in France at all. So it was, it was all into Pearl Jam and that kind of band. But in the early 2000s, that's not really a thing in France.
Oh, really?
So it was frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, so was it like a grunge rock band?
It was hard rock. It had many different influences. Early on, it was quite metal. But then, it evolved a little bit, first of all, because it's hard to sing. But yeah, it was my biggest influence when I was a teenager was definitely Pearl Jam. So I wish I had grown up in Seattle area in the 90s. That would have been amazing. So that I had always known that thing that I wanted to see that and live through that and see all the concerts and, hang out with people like Pearl Jam and the whole Seattle scene and Soundgarden folks. And it's really something that I wish I had experienced, but, it was in Paris, not really a thing. But, I was watching movies like Singles. That was really one of my big movies when I was a teenager. Like I was like, yeah, this looks super cool. I'd love to hang out with these guys. So, yeah.
I love that.
Well, I grew up in Washington State, not in Seattle, but in Washington State. And my first ever concert was Pearl Jam.
Oh my God, I hate you.
Yeah, I know. No. I know. That was usually people don't get how cool that is.
Yeah, it is super cool. So what year was that?
Oh God, it was late in Pearl Jam. And the worst part is this is something I think about like when I'm, going to sleep at night and reliving past trauma. Like I got a t-shirt at that first Pearl Jam concert and I like wore it for years and years and it was my favorite t-shirt. And then I went through like a closet purge and I was like, I don't need this. This is like a 15-year-old t-shirt. I got rid of it.
Oh no.
So then so from kid playing games with your parents, aspiring rock star, then through to psychology and then the games industry. How did that happen?
Yeah. So I also love science. That's the thing. I love art and science. And in arts, I'm mostly attached to music, but I love science. This is also something I was doing as a kid, back in the day when we didn't have Wikipedia. That was really painful to get information and to get all the books and encyclopedia to understand things. But yeah, understand human and biology and the brain and how that works. It was always fascinating to me. So after I finished high school, I was interested into doing some studies, but I also wanted to earn some money as soon as possible so I could keep playing music and make that work. So I started to study psychology because I thought that would be cool to understand a bit better these things. But it really blew me away because I discovered really all the different types of all the different areas in psychology. Like most people, when you say psychology, they think clinical psychology and they think, okay, you're listening to people and solving their problems and helping them out. Right, Luke?
Yeah.
But this is actually just a small part of psychology. You have a lot of different areas and you have what we call cognitive psychology and experimental psychology and psychophysics. And these are way more grounded in science in the sense that we do experiments, we try to understand how people function, how mental processes work. And that was a revelation to me. And I really got hooked into it. So it just started like, yeah, let's do psychology. Why not? That sounds cool. And then I was like, oh my God, this is actually super fascinating. And I really dove into it and it was like, okay, I want to know more. And, all in all of a sudden I had a PhD. What happened? I just wanted to have like short studies so I could start earning money and it just play rock music, and it ended in that. Okay, now I'm a doctor. What do I do?
That's so cool. What's the craziest fact you know? Like, is it true that people only use 10% of their minds? Is that a fact?
It is not true. That's
really?
one of these. I know, right? But hey, look at this in that way. If it was true, you'd be in a very sad state. I tell you. Yeah, you need more than 10% of your brain just to clench your fist. So we use our brain, the whole of the brain, all the time. What is true though is
I'm kind of comforted by that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know why we feel that we want to have all these 90% of our brain is just sit there.
No, that actually makes me anxious. Like I should be doing more, and the idea that I'm using what I have makes me feel better.
No, exactly. No, so you're good with what you have. You're using all of your brain. Good job. That's good.
Thank you.
But that being said, we can train to learn, to do better, to do more things and faster. Like for example, when you start to play, say, the guitar, after some training, you will see that it's going to change your brain. We're going to create more connections between neurons. We call that synapses. And so as you practice doing something, it is changing your brain, whatever it is. It could be playing video games or learning how to play the piano or the guitar, learning a new language. And this is more what's behind the 10% thing, is like if you train into doing something, if you practice, it is going to change your brain. We're not pre-wired in the first place. We constantly rewiring our brains. And we see, when people learn how to do something, we see the changes in our brain from, maybe a year before. And if they train a lot, and we look back in the brain and we see that there's a modification. So it means that you will use all of your brain, but you also can develop skills. And this is what we do in real life. Like we develop skills, we train. And that's the reason why it's really important to train and to practice if you want to get better at something.
That's so cool. So cool. I am still disappointed that we do use our whole brains.
Why are you really disappointed with that?
Yeah, I'm the opposite on that. I'm like, oh, thank God, I'm using it all.
Luke thinks about the movie Lucy.
Possibilities.
It's such a bad movie for that. I'm sorry. I hate that movie because it's scientifically bullshit. But I feel like you have that sense that you're like Lucy. Maybe you can unlock powers in your brain and just start pulling stuff up and mind spoons, because this is really important to know how to do. It's super handy in real life to know how to do that.
Yeah, like Limitless. Have you guys seen Limitless?
No.
With Bradley Cooper, and he takes like a pill, and the pill allows you to basically use the other part of your brain, like the rest of your brain, and it basically enables you to just see everything clearer and everything. You have a lot of clarity, and you can work out things incredibly quickly, and it's all like.
Well, you can try psychedelics, this
Could you
same effect.
Next week, let me go no show.
It might not be really what's going on.
From a cognitive science perspective, what is happening when you try psychedelics? This is going way off track, but now I can't.
And this is going off my my expertise actually. But the psychedelics is changing the chemistry in your brain, and so you will have hallucinations. And there are many things that can create hallucinations. And that's the thing, when you sleep, you are hallucinating. And so this is more like you're still awake and you're hallucinate. But I don't know. I'm not a neurobiologist. I can't really tell you. I don't want to say anything because I'm scared of saying something that is not entirely accurate. And in my field, we want to stay accurate. But yeah, it's changing the chemistry in your brain. And this is the reason why you see things. What we see and hear and feel is a representation of it. It's a construction of your brain. And so this is mind-blowing to a lot of people, but we don't all perceive the world the way it is. Now, the brain is fascinating in that way, but it's not evolved to make you perceive things accurately. It was evolved to make you survive. So that's the very important premise of user experience. Let's try to tie it back to video games.
It's a transition. Yeah, it's a great transition.
I was going to try to make that transition, but you did it for us.
But that's the thing. When you create a game, you see it through your own lens. And if you want to offer a great experience to your players, you need to stop seeing it through your own lens and shift from your own perspective so that you can adopt the perspective of your players. And because perception is subjective, you need to test. So this is why we do play testing. This is the reason why we have guidelines. This is the reason why we need to understand psychology and mental processes, because an experience is what happens in people's minds, and experiencing a video game is no different. So we need to understand how the brain works, how we process information so that we can anticipate problems from happening and shift from our own perspective so that we can offer the best experience possible to our players.
Well, I honestly think we could just make a whole new podcast of just Luke and I sitting here while you talk and going, whoa, oh, cool.
I could say, yeah, like, you know, when you're like reviewing like people and the psychology of people who play video games, are there different trends in people who play games, different games? And I suppose, yeah, how does that influence how you view psychology? And I guess, Kaylee, you had a question like prior to that, but how does your psychology impact the way you view UX, and how has that evolved? I guess that's like 4 questions in one. But
oh my God. Okay. So UX stands for user experience, and it has different names. Back in the day, we were calling that more like human factors psychology, because it was about, let's say you're building planes. All right. Like it's the war and you're building planes, and you try to make planes in the best way possible for engineers so that we can produce planes faster, which kind of makes sense. But then you realize that the humans, they need to be super trained on the planes to be able to use the plane. But the problem is that from plane to plane, it's not necessarily consistent. And so humans make mistakes. We make errors all the time. And when you're under pressure, it's a war. This is when you're even more likely to make a mistake and to press the wrong button. And so instead of, I don't know, like activating the thrusters, you just like eject or whatever. So I'm not saying that was a real thing, but people would mistake a button for another just because they're super under pressure. And this is when people realize that we need to shift from the mentality of we need to design things as fast as possible and in the most efficient way for engineers or designers, so it's efficient for us and to build what we believe is important. And we started to shift into, okay, but humans have human limitations, and these products are made for humans' consumption. And if we want to avoid humans crashing the plane, that would be very costly. It's actually, yes, we save some time in the production line, but if many humans are crashing the plane because they did not press the correct button, or we spend a lot of time training them so that they can use the planes efficiently, then at the end of the day, we did not really save time. We wasted a lot of time. And so that's the idea is that we take more time into prototyping and verifying and have the human at the center of what we do. We call that human-centered design as well, so that we can verify that humans, where their limitations in terms of perception, in terms of attention, in terms of memory, will correctly use the device, and we can prevent fatal errors from happening so that it's a better design for humans. And this is what UX means. It's like really focusing on the experience of the end user. And that came out initially, it really boomed, so to speak, in the military. But now it's used in any product design, industrial design, web design, and game design. And the term UX comes from Donald Norman, who is a UX designer, and he was also a kind of scientist. And he was VP at Apple at some point. And the idea, he really wanted to not just focus on when people interact with the product itself, but also think about the product as being part of a whole ecosystem. So if you think about the Apple experience, it's not just about interacting with your computer or your phone. It's about what is your experience at the Apple Store? How do you hear about the products for the first time? You know, how the advertisements are going to be shaped. What is your experience when you download a product or you unbox a product? What is your experience as you interact with the product itself? But what is your experience afterwards? And how do you remember about this experience? What do you remember? And if you need to contact a customer service, how is that experience? So he was the first to coin that term user experience to really encompass the whole user journey as a customer, as a user, and all these different steps. So this is what it means. It's if you want to offer the best experience possible, you need to understand that you're designing for humans, and these humans have limitations. We all have the same limitations, more or less. And so because we know the product so well, it's really hard for us to anticipate let's say the tutorial of a game. For us, it's super obvious because we know exactly what we need to focus on and what we need to learn in the game and what is important in the game. But it's not the case for new players. They need to discover all that. They don't necessarily know what is the most important thing in your game. And so it's really hard to onboard players on something that you know very well because you lost that ability to be a naive user having to discover all these things. For you, you have a very clear mental representation, mental model of what your game is about. But it's not the case for new players. So this is what we do. We try to, by understanding the limitations of the brain, is helping us anticipate problems from happening. But of course, we need to test because it's not, even if we can anticipate a lot of problems and we have guidelines that help us, from the beginning, not making huge mistakes with our design, we still need to verify with real players. Depending on the game, players are going to have different motivations and they want to do different things. So we care about what sort of games they play. If you love shooter games, you're going to have specific expectations about what a shooter game is about. And so it's more about the expectations that people have depending on what sort of games they play and what they care about and what do they want in your game. So this is what we care about mostly, because someone who's playing a lot of puzzle games don't have the same expectations that people who play a lot of shooters. And that's okay. And they don't know the same conventions. It's not the same conventions that is used. If you hear reload in a shooter, you know that if it's a multiplayer, your friend is reloading, and so you need to cover that person. You don't need to explain these things because these are conventions that are known. And if you start to play a match 3 game, you know that you need to match 3 things. And so these are conventions that are really tied to a genre. And so this is what this is their prior knowledge. And prior knowledge is changing your perception. This is really what we're looking into. I hope that answers your question. I was trying to go a little bit all over.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
I think I like that answer because it's very comforting to me to be like, when I was a kid, the YM magazine quizzes where you would go through and be like, what type of best friend are you? And you would answer 13 questions. And then at the end it would be like, you're a this, and be told who I am.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
I find that very comforting, but
okay.
it's bullshit.
It is
and
bullshit.
So that's it is that I find it very comforting, but then 30 seconds later, I'm like, yeah, but that's not true.
Yeah.
So I like that your answer was basically it's just about expectations. There's no, if you play FPS, you're this exact psychological profile. It's you have different expectations coming into a game.
Yeah.
And that influences your experience.
Yeah, there's a lot of people love personality tests because we love to know how different we are from everybody else, which is weird to me.
Yeah.
We are way more close to each other than we're different, but somehow we want to differentiate from everybody else. And so we love these tests, but the large majority of them are bullshit, and including tests that sound more scientific, like the Myers-Briggs.
Like a Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, and it is total crap. It is bullshit. It's not verified scientifically. But we love that because it's so easy to have these 4 letters and, you're either an introvert or an extrovert. There's nothing in between. It's black and white. This is not
I think
how
it
works.
makes it convenient to have conversations with people about how they are in the world versus how I am in the world.
Absolutely. But it's not because it's convenient that it is true. It's not.
What about,
It's true. Yeah.
have you guys done the colors test? Is that true? You have the different colors.
No,
yellow, green,
already
blue,
sounds
red.
bullshit too.
I feel for sure Celia's going to tell us that's bullshit.
I think it's true.
Okay, the only well, you can believe whatever you want. People believe in many different things, and that's okay.
I want it to be
no
true
judging.
because I loved how I sounded in that test. So I was like, yes,
But
great.
that's the reason why they're so popular.
I know.
As soon as you're like, oh yeah, I like that. I'm totally like that. That's totally me because it's reflecting.
It's very comforting to me.
Yeah, it's comforting.
Do you think the same with horoscopes then? I guess you think horoscopes are the same.
You really want to ask me that question?
I just want confirmation.
It's bullshit. I'm sorry, but it can be fun if you like it.
That's so good.
There's always little things that you can just hang on to. It's vague enough that everyone can feel that way. And it's okay. We're super superstitious. Humans are very superstitious. We need to hang on to things to guide us through our days. And because it's scary, the world out there is scary. There's so many things we don't understand. What is death? We don't know. And so we need to move on. And if we don't find these ways, to reduce what we call the cognitive dissonance, this discomfort that we have when things are scary, or when, maybe you did something that you're not proud of, but you try to explain it because it was that context or whatever. There's all these little things that we do to reassure ourselves. You were saying, like Kylie, you were saying, it's comforting. We need this
very comforting.
But scientifically speaking, right now, the only personality test that is the most reliable so far is the one we call the Ocean. So if you want to really try one, try this one.
I do. Okay, Ocean?
Ocean, yeah. It's also called the Big Five. It's 5 factors. So you have O is for openness to experience, C is for conscientiousness. I can't ever say that word. E is for extroversion, A is for agreeableness, and then N is for narcissism.
Wow. Okay, Luke and I will be taking this test in a moment. The
beauty of this test is that it's a continuum. You're in, for example, for the E, for extroversion, you're not either introvert or extrovert. You're somewhere in the spectrum. It means that if you're more towards like high extroversion, you need more often to be with people. But if you're lower, it means that you need less people, but it doesn't mean you cannot ever be with anyone.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but during the pandemic, I was looking at a lot of people saying, well, I thought I was an introvert, but, guess what? I need people. Yeah, because it's not black or white. It's just like some people need more to be with others, and some people can also be fine to be alone every now and then. It's just like more of a quantity thing, but we're all very social creatures. At some point, if we don't see people, it's really hard.
Correct. Again, not to stay too off topic because I know I've got a few questions to go. But do you think we just do it because society, just generally, people find it easier to put labels on things so they can associate them with certain things, and then they know how to behave towards those things? And like you see from government, society, and education, you're kind of always going through this process of being like, these are your grades, so means this is the class you're in, so this means this is how we're going to speak to you.
Absolutely. We do need to classify things so that we can move on. That's something that brain does, and it's something that actually we need to learn. To classify things that are triangles and circles, and classify colors. At what point it's a continuum. At one point, when is it green and when is it blue? It's at some point we just decide that this is going to be green and this is going to be blue. Language is the same thing. The different sounds like L or R, it's on the same continuum, but there are languages that are discriminating between both, like in English or in French, and other languages that don't, like in Japanese, you don't have this discrimination. And so early on when you're a baby, you can discriminate all what we call the phonemes. But then as you specialize in your own language, you lose the capacity to discriminate between these sounds that very early on. That's what we do. We need to specialize into what's around us, and we need to make sense of the world very fast, to put people in boxes. Overall, it's pretty useful to survive, but it creates a lot of problems as well. And this is where biases are coming from. This is where discrimination is coming from. Of course, it's not all green. It's also not all bad, because if we're not able to categorize things and decide and move on, it would be really, really hard to make any decisions. On one hand, we need these shortcuts so that we can make all the countless decisions that we need to make in our lives. But we also need to recognize that this is what's going on. And in our world today, it is way more complex than when we were trying to survive in the savannah. And the brain is still the same. It did not really evolve in the past 1,000 years because it's not as fast. But our world has complexified greatly. And now we live in a global society. And we need to recognize that all these boxes is actually creating a lot of problems and feeding racism and sexism. And we're not going to be able to solve the great problems of our world today, like the climate emergency, if we don't find a way to all communicate together and all work towards the same goal. This is going way off topic.
No, this is great.
So
I've got like a good follow-up question to this. So do you think, you see like the video games industry, it's happened with music as well and with film, but often when like atrocities happen in life, like school shootings, for example, like creative mediums are blamed for their influence on that individual who's like committed these things. They're the ones they try and blame something. Is that because, do the media do that because that's what they want society to believe, or is that how they truly think has happened? I mean, in your experience working with like players and people and your experience in psychology, do you ever see anything that indicates that people are influenced enough by media and video games to actually go on and do these atrocities?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, we have a lot of research on video games and violence. For some reason, that these research got a lot of funding, and despite the numerous studies that we have from the past decades, there is no evidence that playing a video game can make you violent. Playing violent video games, whatever these are, because what is a violent video game? First of all, it's a complicated definition, but for the games that were tested, there's no evidence that playing a violent game will lead you to commit violence in real life or to be aggressive in real life. There's no evidence of that. And this has been 30 years now. So no, there's no reason to keep saying this because there's no evidence backing this up. Now, why people do that, I don't know. I think, first of all, there's a lot of scapegoating from some politicians, depending, if you're in the US, there is some good reasons to find a scapegoat rather than really addressing gun violence and to talk about people having guns and it's not regulated. So yeah, there is a reason to try to muddy the science in here and try to blame something else. And it's not the first time that this has happened. Like in the past decade, sadly, this is a technique that we've seen over and over again to insinuate doubt in people's minds and saying that the science is not clear when actually the science is pretty clear. But we now use science, like a pseudoscience, to try to, again, like insinuate doubt and try to distract people from the real problems. Yeah. So that's what I've been seeing. And a lot of people are really alarmed by that.
Yeah, a lot of people play Mario, right? But you don't see everyone going to become plumbers and if that's the thing, like some of these video games, like platform games and things like this, you don't then see a surge in certain careers, even though in a lot of games you actually play a character.
I mean, there's no more plumbers ever since we had Mario. That's well,
since Mario, exactly. It's like it's not all of a sudden like, oh my god, like 400% more people are like. For people of 400% more likely to be plumbers.
More mushrooms either.
Well, in Portland, we are eating more mushrooms.
Well, is it come from Mario though?
No. Is there a lot of plumbers in Portland?
Yeah, probably. I bet there's artisanal plumbers in Portland.
Why do you think like the video games? I mean, despite its like amazing contribution, not only as a creative medium and entertainment and from an economical perspective and the number of jobs it's created, especially over the last 20 years, like it's just like such a huge industry now. Why do you think it still does have a bit of a stigma and is used as a scapegoat with politicians and media outlets? Not all, by the way, just a handful, but why?
Well, a handful is very vocal though. I don't know, because so when I started to really be interested in the video game industry, because we didn't talk about that, but after I had my PhD, like, what do I do now? But I was interested in video games because, of course, I grew up with them, and I saw a lot of people, parents or policymakers, being stressed out by games and being concerned, and so I started to look into the research of video games back then, and I saw that already back then, I know talking about that, it was the mid 2000s. The research on violence was not really conclusive, and that video games could have some benefits also. And so I started to talk about these things before working in the game industry and writing articles to explain to people, don't be worried if your kid is playing video games. It's not a problem. And so back then, I thought, it's still new. It's a new medium. So anything that is new is going to create concern. We had that for every single new technology that got out. But today, we've been having video games for the past 40 years now. And so that is more interesting to me in the sense that I don't understand why this is still a thing. And we're still afraid of video games where we have a third of the world population playing video games. I really don't understand why is it still so strong in some people, and it's creating a lot of issues, and we have that just sort of moral panic about video games. So I do think we need to, because video games are so popular, we need to understand, what are the limitations of games. It's really important to talk about ethics and to understand what could potentially be some negative impacts of video games so that we can understand them, isolate them, just like anything. But I don't understand why there's still that moral panic about games, that people are, games are turning kids into addicts, or games are turning people into violent. It is weird to me, so I still don't understand. I don't get it. Recently, we saw a lot of things that are weird, and they're just conveyed by a small percentage of population. But because it's sensationalism, I can't say that word either.
You have killed every word that you thought you couldn't say. The sensationalism, you got it.
Right? It's hard. But this sells more. So, and you see that people share that more on social media. So maybe it's because of the social media. I don't want to blame it on social media either, because it's also an easy scapegoat. But it is because of the algorithms that are used. It is putting up all the things that are more stressful and more concerning, and even though it's not necessarily scientifically based. And so it has a tendency to favor this kind of information. And so maybe this is the reason why it still hasn't gone away. I don't know. It's still very mind-blowing to me today.
Well, so what about the concept of video games as an addiction?
Yeah. So recently, the World Health Organization has decided to have a gaming disorder in their ICD. So it's like a dictionary of diseases. And there's a lot of controversy about that. There's a lot of researchers and people expert in addiction that are saying, hang on a minute, we don't have enough research today to actually say that we should have a specific disorder for people who have a pathological relationship with games. You have people that are going too much shopping, or have a pathological relationship with sports, or with pretty much anything. But do we have something specific about games that would require to have a specific disorder about games? So far, a lot of researchers are saying, no, we can't really say that. But because the WHO has really added this term in the dictionary, now it's becoming more of a thing, and now we have to reply to that. Again, I'm not an expert in addiction at all, but of course, because I'm in the game industry, I have to understand these things better. I talk with, so mostly it's French addictologists that I talk to, but I've been reading a little bit on this topic. And overall, what they're saying is that to have an addiction, really in the clinical sense of the term, it's an encounter of three things. It's the encounter of a person with a certain personality with an object. So overall, when we talk about addiction, we mean a substance. So it could be tobacco, it could be alcohol, drugs, and a context. And so it could be the context that you're depressed, or there's something going on in your life. You're not able to cope with things in your life. And so I've never heard anyone saying that a specific object will absolutely create an addiction to some people, especially not what we call behavioral addiction. So doing something like gambling or playing video games. Right now, the only addiction to a behavior, what we call behavioral addiction in the DSM, so it's just like a mental disorder classification, is gambling addiction. Like right now, you don't have a gaming disorder. It's like people are saying, well, we need to research more on that. And so that's the problem. Right now, there's really a lack of consensus among scientists and researchers whether or not we should have a specific disorder tied to playing video games. And so right now, a lot of people are saying, not using that term addiction, but they're saying playing too much video games, or having a pathological relationship with video games. And so these things exist. You do have people who are engaging way too much with video games, and this is impacting their life in the sense that they are not taking care of their work or their social life anymore. And so it's harming them or harming others around them, and they keep playing despite that. So in that case, you can say that there's a problem. You have we call that pathological gaming. And this is definitely something that we need to be aware of, and we need to help these people and to treat them, definitely. But there's a big leap in saying that the game developers are responsible for this. And this is not what addictologists are saying. So it could be that because of your personality or because of the context of your life right now, you might play more video games to cope with it as escapism, or
interesting.
Yeah, because you're depressed, so you invest way more in video games. But so the problem is not lying in video games itself. It's lying because right now things are difficult for you. And so video games is just a way to escape, just like alcohol can be a way to escape.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the onus on fixing it isn't actually on game developers. It's on, the onus isn't on anyone except for the individual, but it's a mental health issue, not a game development issue.
Yes. But that being said, it's not because this is not a pathology that's created by game developers that we should not look into things that I use to engage people a little bit artificially with the game.
Sure.
And that's a completely different issue. This is what we call attention economy. What are the tricks that I use in technology to engage people on the platform longer, or monetization? That we should definitely look into. And there is a responsibility here to understand what is the pressure that is put on people to accomplish your goals in terms of business. So I definitely believe that we should look into it. And it's really important to move forward on these questions. But it's very different than saying that we're creating addicts. That's an enormous leap. And the problem is that right now the moral panic is around that. And now game developers are accused to being like drug dealers, and they're just like...
That's a great answer.
I guess you've already answered this. Obviously, what impact does dopamine have on the success of a bike?
Yeah, 100 points for Luke for mentioning dopamine.
I mean, do you think, not that developers go out their way to do it, right? But obviously there are, like you just said, like there are developers who do look at monetization as probably their primary goal, and games as a service, or like just these not addictive games, but games that are created
engaging.
What impact does dopamine have on the individuals who play those games? And
okay, so we've seen the word dopamine flying around because neuroscience is super trendy today. And like you're saying, we're talking about, do we use 10% of our brain? People are fascinated by the brain, and we're fascinated about neurobiology, and these hormones are there, controlling your life. So there are things that we do in life that we don't really control. It's more like implicit motivation, such as, towards the end of the day, you might be motivated to go to sleep because you feel sleepy, and you feel sleepy because your body is producing melatonin, which is a hormone that prepares you to go to sleep. So there's a bunch of our hormones that is giving us some implicit motivation to do things. Now, dopamine, the problem is that people they simplify and take shortcuts, things that are highly complicated and we don't understand well. Dopamine, we know, has an impact on wanting something. So for example, if you want something, you might have a spike in dopamine to motivate you to get that thing. But it's for anything, food or anything that having sex or seeing someone, you would have all these spikes in dopamine. Now, I'm not a neurobiologist again, but there's a better understanding that what dopamine does is just giving you information about errors. Like, for example, if you did not expect something good to happen to you, but you get something good, let's say you just expect to spend a night alone at home, and surprise that a friend is coming to your place, post or pre-pandemic. And so it's a good surprise. And so you might have a big surge of dopamine because it's a reward that you did not expect. So this is useful for the brain and the body because we need to understand, we need to predict what's going to happen in the environment. And if we have something that's unexpected that gives us a reward, it's important for us to remember that. But we have these spikes in dopamine for many things. And there are some studies that look into the spikes in dopamine where you play games. And yes, you have a spike of dopamine, but it's not more than having sex or eating food. And that's the thing, is we don't really understand what is the impact of dopamine. Even for drugs so methamphetamine, this is the drug that you will see really a huge spike, is 1,000 times more than playing video games. And even then, addictologists are not saying that the spike in dopamine is going to determine the strength of your addiction to something. And so this is really, really complicated. Overall, we don't really understand what is the impact of dopamine. And we also have dopamine shots just because moving around. Like you have diseases like Parkinson. When you have Parkinson, it's a deficiency in dopamine. So dopamine is also important for movement. Some people are going to use dopamine is the hormone of pleasure, which is really not at all linked to pleasure, but it can be linked to motivation. It still doesn't say much. So just saying that video game developers are just getting these shots of dopamine is again a big leap. And this is, we see all the time because the brain is complicated and scientists are trying to figure it out and we don't understand most of what's happening. And it's just easier to have these shortcuts and saying, yeah, this is your dopamine, or you're having pleasure and this is this hormone. And it just makes things simpler. Just like we said earlier, we need to put labels on things and to categorize things so they can move on with our lives. But the problem with science, we don't do that. We actually want to understand perfectly how things are working, and it takes a while. And right now, we don't really understand what is the role in dopamine and clearly in addiction. It's not clear what's going on here.
No, I think that was a great explanation.
I don't know if it's great. I'm struggling to explain all that because, again, you're asking me questions outside of my expertise. So I'm just trying to figure it out myself. And it's hard to explain.
It's very interesting to hear from you, though, because obviously because of your background, like because of your work in psychology and obviously you work in UX, and you've also worked at like, Epic, and you've worked at these big publishers, and obviously Fortnite's obviously the world's largest game, whereby the retention model is to keep people essentially playing. They enjoy the game for the sake of enjoying the game, but actually also the other great thing is you have Game Pass, so you unlock rewards. Yeah. Like in World of Warcraft, you obviously unlock rewards.
No, but even if forget about dopamine, that's not even the important part. What's important is to understand what game developers are doing. And if they are putting pressure on people to trigger them, quote unquote, trigger them into coming back to the platform or playing longer, it is still a problem, dopamine or not. Like we should not even, that's not the important part. But in terms of ethics, we do need to look into what's going on. And the large majority of game developers, they are just passionate about their job. It's an art form, and we forget to talk about that again and again. It's just like the film industry, the movie industry, like it's an art form. Like most people are passionate about this, but it doesn't, there's still people who want to make money. It's an industry. So it's in the video game industry.
I think that's the most interesting thing about it, right? Like you have, and it's almost come to a crux in the last couple of years, like this like pinnacle of, you have this wave of indie developers who are focusing a lot on innovation, creativity, and trying to stand out by just thinking about the medium in a different format and how they apply their perception of creativity. And then you have AAAs, and obviously they're doing great, obviously in terms of innovation. And look at the Battle Royale scene, that's a completely brand new genre, which is great from AAA publishers. But at the same time, they do have a greater focus on revenue because they do have shareholders. Like they do have to hit these certain margins, which means they're going to be more inclined to focus on elements of revenue than say your indie who's just like, I just want to make the best game possible.
I would agree with that. But again, so every time I have this conversation, we get to the point like, well, the problem is the capitalistic economy. You have not only to make money, but you have to make more money every year to satisfy shareholders. And to do that, we lay off people, for example. And so there's all of these problems are coming from the same issue. It's just like money, money, money. But it's not the case for every games. You can still make money and make revenues without using all these tricks. So it's important to understand what are these tricks are and how we use it, because a lot of game developers just use it because someone else is using it and they don't really understand the pressure that we put on people. So that's the reason why I started with a few colleagues, the initiative called ethicalgames.org. And it's just an initiative. It's just to try to think about what a code of ethics would look like in the game industry for players, how we can make sure that we offer them the best experience possible without tricking them into forcing them to come back to the platform, because otherwise they're going to miss out on something amazing. So we don't want to use fear of missing out. for example, but also for game developers, how we can make sure that the industry grows without exploiting workers, without excluding people, because right now the game industry is not inclusive at all. So it's all these questions that we need to raise, and we need to raise the bar. And it's really important to look into it, but it's way more nuanced than, addiction and dopamine shots and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think it's really important for us, like in the game industry, to look into these things more precisely and to address these concerns instead of saying, well, no, see, people are saying that we're not creating addiction, so whatever, we can wash our hands of this. It's not a good answer either. Or it's not a good answer saying, well, people are saying that video games make people violent. It's not true. And look at all the games that are amazing and that are like making a change in the world, like positive change. It's not a good answer either, because video games are not a big block. It's not because there are games that are great and are maybe helping social change that the other game that is just like using a lot of dark patterns or gray area sort of patterns to get people to come back and to pay more to get something because it's paid to win. So all these things we need to look into very specifically so we can address them and inform the public so that we can stop the moral panic, hopefully, and move forward.
No, that's great. I was going to ask you about like anxiety in video games. I'm a bit worried about like going down that route because I don't want this episode to come across too like panic. like the panic of it. You don't want to like have people to the fire. And I think because we've spoken about dopamine and like addiction quite a lot, I think if I add in anxiety to the mix, we're just going through like the different.
I have the plates. I just want to talk about hard things here.
It's okay to feel anxious about a lot of situations in life, and that doesn't have to be like a bad or embarrassing thing.
Although royals, our games are putting a lot of pressure because you have the pressure of time and you have the pressure of the environments that so it's forcing and counter. And so for a lot of players, this is actually exciting because at the beginning they can explore, and the more you advance in the game, the more pressure you have. And that's great for a lot of people, but it's not suited for a lot of people, especially children. I would not recommend a battle royale type of game for children. It's way too much pressure. But also if you have anxiety or if you just want to play games to relax, it is not relaxing at all, but because that's the point of being exciting and forcing them to counter. So if you're not down for that, it's totally okay.
Yeah.
When I play like Mario Kart with my kids, I get anxious because I like want to do good and impress them.
Social pressure.
And the idea of them watching me and I want to do good for them, it makes me feel really anxious.
Do you think it's crazy that we have like, there's so much anxiety? And do you think there's always been this level of anxiety, like different anxieties, like Haley just said, and our situations can be different? We hear a lot of people talk about anxiety at the moment. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it was always there, of course. It's just, we're just starting to talk about it. Again, the world is getting more complex. We have very complex social relationship today. We are very social creatures. So how people see us is really important to us. We need to collaborate to, like I said, solve the great challenges in our time. Just like back in the day, we had to socialize and help each other out to survive our predators. We were not equipped to survive by ourselves. So this is the reason why we have a very strong social structure to help each other out so we can outsmart those predators. So it is really important. And I think we just lost track of that. This is a more philosophical question. And again, I love philosophy, but I'm not good at it. And there's many things that I don't understand well. So it's really, this is not a scientific opinion I'm going to give. It's just like a stupid opinion, just my own opinion. But it does feel that we are losing track of what's really important. And it takes like a pandemic to remind us of all the pressure that we've been through. And that doesn't make any sense. And a lot of people are like, I've seen a lot of people saying, why am I doing this? Not seeing my family. And now that we're just stuck inside a lot of time, we're like, why did we lose connection to just like taking stroll in nature? And we have some evidence that it's actually important to be out in nature, to have a better mental health. So all these things we start to understand it a bit better. But again, we still have over our head like the pressure of the economy, and we have to be productive. We have to be efficient. We have, and you're like, okay, so again, why are we doing this? Who is this for? And why should it matter? Because it certainly doesn't matter for us, because we're not the ones with getting the big checks at the end of the month. So it's making us rethink about these things. And now we have a much clearer look at anxiety and the pressure that we put on ourselves. So it's really interesting to look into that, definitely. And it's more than time for us to have a clearer understanding of what do we need and what are the important things in life that does matter. What does matter and what does not.
It feels like, like you have work, right? And you have that phrase, keeping up with the Joneses, like everyone wants to keep up. And then social media almost made that ever present, right? Like everyone's on social media saying, a lot of people just posted all the good things. And it was like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. And so you had that fear of missing out. So you wanted to do these things. So you post. I think with video games, sometimes you could say there's a parallel between that and real life in that, especially with social games, you almost mimic what you do in real life because that's what you're trained to do, right? Like you're trained to achieve more and more and more in your social circle and be the best. So then you're like, I need to put more time in. But we
have better control over our gaming life and our real life. There's actually some theories saying that people who play too much, it's maybe because they have a better sense of control, a better sense of competence in these games that they have in real life. So in games, that if you keep working hard enough, you'll get there. In real life, it's not the case. And you have all these problems. You have discrimination and meritocracy is bullshit. And so that's one of the theories that some people escape in games because it's more satisfying. You have more control over your destiny in games than you have in real life.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's fair. When I play games, I'm like, this is great. Anyway.
So the question is how we can make our society more satisfying for everyone.
I think
more than how we can make games less engaging.
Do you know what? That is it. Exactly. I think that's such a good point. How do we make society more interesting? How do we make it more rewarding?
Yeah.
And how do we make it fairer?
Satisfying. Satisfying was a good word for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, why does it have to be painful? I mean, there's so many challenges that we have to overcome. Like we can make things much simpler than they are.
It needs to be fairer as well, right?
Definitely.
So looking back, like, what would you say has been your greatest achievement so far? And like looking forward, what's the one thing you want to achieve?
Oh, wow. It's hard because I try to not pat myself in the back too much because then you lose track of what's important and then, you rest on your own laurels. So it's not a good habit. But I'm definitely proud of the game UX community. I participated a little bit in growing this. I'm the chair of the Game UX Summit, which I started thanks to Epic. Back then, we organized a conference. And then there were a lot of interest in there. And so we started to do it every year, but at a different studio. So in 2017, it was hosted by Ubisoft Toronto, and then we hosted in different places in EA Vancouver and in France also at Plein Image, and we're supposed to host it at Bungie before the pandemic hit. So we're going to have the one at Bungie next year because this year was still a bit stressful. But I'm a bit proud of that because it brings people together in a way. There are a lot of different conferences, and there is also a strong GRUX community, game research and user experience. But what I'm proud of is I don't know, just seeing these bunch of people, and we try to be as inclusive as possible. And that I'm very proud of because it's just another channel where people can come in and they're welcome to join, and we can talk about science and we talk about hard things like ethics and discrimination and inclusion and accessibility. And I think it's great to have just another channel because we need more channels like these to have people meet and talk freely about these things. I'm also happy about the job on Fortnite, but then it blew up a little bit, and so today it's like, okay, that's very different from the game I worked on. But yeah, the greatest challenge would be to keep going to help overcome the moral panic and to bring more science to the discussion I think it's really important that we start really thinking twice about what we say when we claim things. I love the saying, with extraordinary claims come extraordinary evidence. So this is really important that we start, us in the game industry, doing this more, because there are also claims in game industry and say, well, video games are going to save the world. I'm like, this is also a bit extraordinary, just like saying video games are keeping people addicted. So if we want to overcome the moral panic, we cannot, on the other side, claim things that are extraordinary without really strong evidence. So that's really what I would like to work more on. And I would really love to be able to build a strong code of ethics, and having studios taking the pledge for it and making it really evidence-based by working with researchers to put this code together. That would really, if I managed to do that, that would be really an achievement that I would be proud of, but it's not done yet. So right now I'm just happy that I contributed a little bit in the community and to multiply these events so that people have more space. But there's so much more to do.
That's great. I love the idea of a code of ethics. The amount you've done for UX is like astonishing. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
You'll be glad to hear we have no more questions. You can sit up now. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was a really fun conversation.
That was Celia Hodent. Big thank you to Celia for joining us. Big thank you to Kaylee for being the fantastic co-host that she is. All the views today are Kaylee, myself, and Celia's, and do not represent our employers. If you would like to reach the Game Dev Show team, feel free to email us at gamedevshow@ptw.com. Absolutely love today's episode. Loved speaking to Celia. Love exploring things like psychology within video games and player communities. I can't wait till next time. Speak soon. Take care, everybody.
Game over.